Is only one physical world enough for a werewolf? Absolutely not. And this is why we have the mystical world of the Umbra. Hello, this is Michel Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today a continuation of my journey across all the official and unofficial expansions of Rage the Apokalipsy, published back in 1995 by White Wolf Entertainment. As far as it is now, I have already presented the review of the base game of the limited or unlimited editions, and now the first official expansion, which was the Umbra. The Umbra was released as well as the base edition in 1995, but what is important, it was released between the limited and unlimited editions. This is why in the unlimited edition we have a new type of cards, firstly introduced in the Umbra, which are the quests. Additionally, some cards were reprinted in unlimited with a different artwork or with different wordings. But Umbra was between those two editions, so unlimited already took into consideration the fact that we had this expansion. This is the smallest of the official expansions for Rage the Apokalipsy because it is comprised only of 95 cards, so under 100. It is also an expansion which was very heavily printed, which means that the cards of the Umbra are firstly very easy to gather and their price is not high. This is the reason why this is the expansion which is the easiest to collect. I have it in full. I have all the 95 cards, including the Chase foiled cards. We had 5 of them in this expansion. Today I'd like to tell you what is in this expansion, so I'd like to show you those cards. I'd like to show you the new types of cards which this expansion introduced, and at the end of the video I'd like to give you my final thoughts. I'd like to underline what I like in this expansion and what I believe are the weaker aspects of the Umbra. So let's start. Here are some of the cards and of the elements coming from the Umbra expansion. Now the Umbra cards were sold only in booster packs. There weren't any starter decks or base decks. We had only boosters, which you can see at the moment. In each booster 12 new cards, and when buying a new box of Umbra cards, it was quite easy to gather almost the entire expansion because you got 2 or even 3 foils inside of such a box. You also received pretty much all the rares. I managed to collect all the Umbra cards due to both the fact that I have bought a box of Umbra boosters a very long time ago, and after opening all those booster packs I had only 3 or 4 cards missing, so it was absolutely feasible to collect almost the entire set only by buying one booster box. Now, when it comes to this expansion, apart from those 12 cards, each booster contained also a special cards which told you what new mechanics, what new rules were added to the base game. Now, the first one and most important one is the fact that when playing with the Umbra, we get an additional playing area. This expansion adds the spiritual, mystical world of the Umbra, which coexists with our physical world. When playing with the Umbra, we get not only the physical world which was present in the base game, but we get this spiritual, mystical world inside which Garou can also act, inside which Garou also can be chosen as alpha, and to which the Garous which are in the physical world can travel. So when
being in the Umbra, you have some limited options when it concerns mood voting, when it concerns attacking enemies which are in the physical world, but at the same time you are also quite safe from attacks from this physical world. Now, adding this additional space also meant that there were cards added to the expansion which enabled you to travel between those two worlds. We have some actions, we have some other means of traveling between the two worlds, but the most common one will be using a kern. Now, this expansion added a special new type of cards, which are the kerns. The kerns are associated each time to one of the 13 tribes, so each tribe received their own kern in this expansion. So to place such a card into play, you had to have at least one Garou of this tribe in your pack. Each kern granted you a special ability, a special bonus which you could use, and additionally it enabled you to travel both to the Umbra and from the Umbra back to the physical world. To travel, you had to comply to the gauntlet limit of each kern. This meant that in order to use such a kern, the gnosis of the Garou which wanted to use such a kern had to be equal or higher from the gauntlet of the kern. So this one, for instance, had a gauntlet of 4, meaning that only Garous with a gnosis of 4 or higher could use it in order to travel to the Umbra or back from the Umbra into the physical world. The expansion added a new type of cards, which were the quests. The quests appeared in the Umbra and they were also present in the Unlimited Edition. So when looking at some cards which are part of the Limited Edition, you might see that they are labeled, for instance, as events, not quests. But then, after the Umbra was released before Unlimited, some cards from the base set were changed into quests. Quests in general are cards which you play in order to accomplish a goal, accomplish an objective. If you manage to do so, you receive a prize, for instance, additional victory points. The final new type of cards introduced by this expansion were the ultra rare cards, the foil cards, the realms. We had 5 of them in this expansion, for instance, Flux. We had also, for instance, the Battleground, or we had Pangea. Each of those ultra rare cards were played during your main phase and they granted you a special bonus at most times when defending against enemy attacks. They are extremely powerful cards, banned from tournament play during some period, now possible to be played because the rules for Rage were rewritten. Mind you, I'm still talking about the basic rules as they were published. I will explain how the new rules work in a different movie. So we had 5 of them, each pretty interesting, each pretty strong. Each tribe received a new character of high renown, varying from 6 to 8. For instance, the Silent Striders got a 6, which was Seas Through Stars. Jennifer Moon Wisent was the Garou added to the Children of Gaia, Fireclaw to the Red Talons, etc. Some of those werewolves had a capacity related to the Umbra. For instance, Seas Through Stars can use the gauntlet of any kern in play to step sideways. Now, we had also some new combat cards in the Umbra. Now, those are the standard cards which were present in the base deck, but this is a special Umbra card. The Umbra introduced new types of combat cards which required you not to have a certain rage, but of having a certain gnosis level. So this was linked to the theme of the expansion because the Umbra is the spiritual, the mystical world, so we are using not rage but gnosis. This is also an interesting addition. So we have 3 or 4 cards, 2 or 3 cards of this type in this expansion. Now, one of the most interesting cards in this expansion is also the Nexus Crawler, which is one of the strongest enemies published in Rage history. As you can see, with a renown of 17. It had a rage of 8, Gnosis 8 and health 13, and additionally when attacking it you had to resolve your cards randomly. So this is really a beast, very hard to be destroyed. Apart from the possibility of stepping sideways using kerns, the change which happened when introducing the Umbra is the addition of a new separate phase of the Umbra phase, which comes before the mood phase. This is the moment when you can step sideways, meaning travel to the Umbra or back from the Umbra to the physical world. Additionally, we have one new mechanic, which is the spirit binding, which enables you to attack some spirits from inside the Umbra in order to bind them. Normally, when you attack an opponent, you defeat it, you take it into your victory pile. But if you bind a spirit, you take it as an ally. It is worth only half of the victory points which it would normally give you, but you can use it as part of your pack. And those are pretty it. All the additional rules, all the additional card types which were added by this expansion. Now, I'd like to tell you what I think about this expansion, and I'd like to share with you my thoughts about both the mechanics added by this expansion and by some cards.
The Umbra is the smallest and the easiest to collect set published by White Wolf Entertainment for Rage the Apokalipsy. This is also the reason why the cards from this expansion are not very expensive, and it is quite easy to grab them even today, after more than 25 years after the release of this expansion. Now, when looking for the strong points, for the interesting things about the Umbra, I'd say that this is an expansion which introduces several interesting elements. The first one, pretty obvious, is the addition of the Umbra itself. Thanks to this expansion, the battlefield, the gaming area becomes quite large. It is much larger than when playing only with the basic set. It adds a new spiritual, mystical world to which we will be able to travel, from which we will be able to attack some spirits, attack enemies, in which we can concentrate our efforts in order to win the game and to score victory points. This is also the reason why playing Rage the Apokalipsy requires us to have some Umbra access. When playing with only the core game, it's not an issue, but adding additional cards from the Umbra makes the game larger and requires you, when building your deck, to adapt to this larger world. You have to take into consideration that you will be maybe facing a deck focused very heavily on the Umbra. And without an option to travel to this world, without an option to hinder your opponent in his own objectives in the Umbra, you will be stalled in the physical world. You'll be able to score points only killing enemies which are placed by yourself in the hunting grounds, or maybe attacking your opponents thanks to some sneak attacks, but ultimately it's your opponent who will be having the access to the Umbra, will take the upper hand. So this expansion changed the way that people had to construct their decks. They had to adapt to this larger world and to include in their decks ways to interact with things which are set in the Umbra. It was a good idea to include the Umbra because thanks to it, Rage becomes complete. It has both the physical world and the spiritual world, which in the Garou society are both as important as the other. So this is a way to complete the entire world. Sure, we had other types of cards, including territories or battlegrounds introduced in other official sets, but it's the Umbra which enlarged and closed finally this world of Rage. When looking for interesting cards and interesting elements which this expansion included, apart from adding all this Umbra spiritual world, it's absolutely important to say that we have here very interesting cards in the form of the realms. Those are the chase cards, which were present both in the Umbra and in the Worm, and if I am correct, in the War of the Amazons. And this is a very powerful type of card. Those cards were banned from official tournament play up until 2002, which means that those cards were really powerful. After 2002, they became valid, but due to the rewriting of the rules. So those cards were again introduced to official tournaments. So those are very powerful assets. At the same time, those are the chase cards, so they are both powerful and rare, which makes them pretty good. At the same time, as I said earlier, it's quite easy to collect them because the price of Umbra cards is not very high. The second type of cards introduced by this expansion are the cairns. Now the cairns are the doorways to the Umbra, enabling you to travel from the physical to the spiritual world and backwards. And those are very important and very interesting cards. It's good to have a way to access the Umbra, both in terms of having a cairn or maybe some action cards, enabling you to travel from one world to another. And cairns not only grant you the possibility to travel, they grant also a special ability to your pack. So having a cairn in play is not only a doorway, it's also a special bonus. Now those bonuses are very different between tribes, they vary, and some are very weak, some are very powerful. The third type of cards were the quests. Now the quests, it's an interesting story because, as I said earlier, the quests appeared in the Umbra and they are included in the unlimited edition. So because this expansion appeared between the limited and unlimited edition, quests were added to the unlimited edition, replacing some events. The Umbral quest is the standard example. Now, interesting other cards include, for instance, cards which are combat cards requiring not rage but gnosis in order to be played, or for instance the Nexus Crawler, which is many people's favorite enemy, a huge monster with 17 points of renown. So this expansion is quite interesting because although it is small, it has only 95 cards, it is easy to collect, still easy to find, even after 25 years, and adding a lot of interesting cards and elements. The small issue concerning this expansion, in my opinion, is the new mechanic introduced, which is the spirit binding. Now, this seems to be an interesting mechanic which allows you to decide when defeating an opponent if to kill it permanently, score the full number of victory points, or maybe take it as your ally and score only the half number of victory points. I'd say that in the games that I have played during the past several years, I have almost never decided to bind a spirit. It's not a thing that I'd like to do because the number of victory points is what at the end decides of the match. If I can, for instance, score 6 or 7 victory points, why should I go for 3 or 4 if I can be almost halfway to the final score, which I need to have to end the game? Well, sometimes it's maybe strategically interesting, but at most times you'll just kill the spirit and you will disregard the binding option. So this will be very rarely used. The second thing which might be an issue with this expansion is the fact that, as I said earlier, it makes the playing area much larger. It makes it much more complicated. It adds a new phase to the turn sequence. But at the same time, it will make some games pretty much bizarre, because when two decks are opposed one to another, in which one is strongly focused on the Umbra and the second is strongly focused on the physical world, the interaction between players in this very competitive, very aggressive collectible card game will be very limited, and this is quite strange. So, as I said earlier, in order to avoid such situations, you should include in your deck always some cards which enable you to interact with things which are located in the spiritual world. Having said that, I believe that the Umbra is a very interesting addition, comprising interesting cards, interesting new types of cards, at the same time a must-have when you play Rage, because having a way to access the Umbra, knowing how the Umbra works and what to expect in it, is a must-have if you want to play this game and have fun against decks which are constructed with cards from the Umbra onwards, because other cards which were published in official and unofficial expansions after the Umbra take into consideration the existence of this second world. This was the review of the Umbra, the first official expansion for Rage the Apokalipsy, published by White Wolf Entertainment. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you also to take a look at our other videos on our channel. Take also a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. And if you want to support Wojennik TV, you can become one of our patrons. Take a look at our Patronite account. I wish you a terrific day and see you next time.